There we are. Well, hello everyone. We hope for the best. Keep in mind, please, that our show is in a very slow internet area, slow speed. We hope that Facebook Live will continue for this whole 90 minutes. If it does not, please switch to Blog Talk Radio. We hope the Blog Talk Radio will last for the entire 90 minutes. If not, switch to Facebook. Okay, here we are. Dear God, who is all there is, you are all we are, and all everything is in this world. We thank you so much as we sit here and open our minds to the information contained in this show, and the information that other people have to share with us, and we thank you so much for all of this. We open ourselves now on this Easter Sunday morning to know what you would have us do, for we believe in the power of prayer. It's nothing short of magical, and yet it is as real as anything there is. We thank you so much, dear God, as we open ourselves to see, hear, sense, and know what you would have us do and what you would have us know in the energy of enlightenment. And we thank you so much as we relinquish needing to know anything, for it is you, through us and through all things, that know it all. Thank you, and so it is. Ellen, thank you so much. Happy Easter to you, dear. For those of you that are listening on Blog Talk Radio, I am talking to some of the dear friends that are writing in on Facebook Live. And Ellen is kind enough to say we are breaking up on Facebook Live. And Ellen, there's not a darn thing I can do about it. I hope that you'll listen on Blog Talk Radio and Facebook Live, have both of them available, and we can make it through. But we are in an area that has very slow internet. I've got the top speed for internet. I bought it that you can get. I can't get any more. And yet, when the wind blows a certain way, you talk about magical thinking, when the wind blows a certain way, or when it gets too wet or too dry or too this or too that, or just on the arbitrariness of life itself, sometimes it goes down. So I'm so sorry. Pixelated or not, I appreciate you being here and communicating with me about this, as I do all of you. Thank you so much for telling me what's going on as we try to do our work. Okay? Now, we're going to talk about magical thinking. Magical thinking is the false belief, and I think the operative word here is false belief, that one's ideas, thoughts, wishes, or actions can influence the course of events in the physical world. Now, anybody that really does consciousness work knows that to a certain extent this is true. I mean, science has proven that there is no experiment that can be done without prejudice, and we always have to be careful, and not that I'm a scientist, but science has to be careful, that our minds do not influence the outcome of experiments. So I do believe that certain parts of this are true. I do think our ideas, thoughts, wishes, and actions can indeed influence the course of events in the physical world sometimes. So where is the line drawn between magical thinking that is good and enhances our lives and magical thinking that shuts us down? We're going to talk about that today in all its aspects. In my philosophy, I do believe that thoughts influence things. We see it over and over again in our lives that, more positive thoughts create positive outcomes. Negative thoughts create negative outcomes, generally speaking. So what I really want to put forth here is the differences between a healthy kind of magical thinking, in which people all over the world engage, and the kind of unhealthy magical thinking that actually can stop your life. We want you to be able to tell the difference and to do something about the latter. We're going to talk about that. Now, my job is teaching deeper levels of consciousness. And to that end, I and other people who study this begin to see things that are really out of the norm. As you are opening up your awareness, as you are opening up your consciousness, this is absolutely undeniable. However, there's a fine line that separates healthy and unhealthy magical thinking from unhealthy magical thinking. And this is what we're talking about. The bottom line here is, I'm going to go on and give it to you now. In my opinion, it depends on which mind you are generating the thought, the feeling, the action from. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if you've listened to me for any length of time, you know there are two minds that in my program we work with. Number one is the egoic child's mind. This is the fear-based self, the part of you that thinks like a child still. This is the part of you that when you were a child, it was very active before you were 7 years old. It was taking in a lot of information. It was rearranging the world. Very importantly, and this is, by the way, where our issues forms, it is an adaptability so that you will survive. Children that are not terribly adaptable sometimes cannot form these issues, and they have a very hard time. So what we consider so bad as adults, these patterns, these issues, we wish they'd go away, really are not. They're all part of the system. I want to say to you that not only are they part of the system, but they're very necessary, because when you start working on deeper levels of consciousness, these very things that so influence us in the negative sense actually enhance us in the positive sense. And I think magical thinking is one of those things. Now, here's what I mean by that. When we're young, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, magical thinking is very prominent until we're about 7 years old. Really, it is. We see everything relative to ourselves. We think we can influence everything. We try one thing, we try another thing, something seems to work, we go with that, whether it's really true or not. In our child's minds, we think it is. So this fear-based egoic self, egoic child's mind self, is certainly one of the minds. The other mind is our highest self, our love-centered mind, our God mind. And in consciousness, we are going from the fear-based self to the love-based self, the child's mind, to merging not only with the adult, but giving up our need to control so much and realizing that we're not alone and that there is a oneness with all life and that God is there, and we are united with that and working from that mind, and that's consciousness and in the advanced stages enlightenment. I hope I'm explaining this well enough for you. I think these two minds are what confuses us often about God. Because in the child's mind, we think God is there in the good times, not there in the bad. But if God is all things, if everything in this world is God, if we are the aspect of God known as us, then we are all things too. And we are only in the process of owning all this, that we may go, because you can't give anything up, you can't surrender anything until you own it. We are going from the egoic child's mind and putting our arms around all those things that we found unacceptable about ourselves. Ultimately, we're trying to do that, at which time we are energy. We are turning into the spiritual being in physical form we are in consciousness, and we make very clear and decided decisions, definite decisions about who we are and what we want to be in every moment defines us. That's what mindfulness is. That's what consciousness is. In this moment, we're present to 100%. Or to almost 100%. We're all striving for that, right? Okay. So these two minds influence our motivations, why we do things, right? We can do things for high reasons that support us and other people, or we can do things for low reasons that hurt ourselves and others. These things come out of our two minds. The egoic child's mind knows nothing of the highest self. It's just trying to survive. That's why if we stay in the egoic child's mind just trying to survive, you're not really creating your life. You're just kind of enduring. But we're not really creating with the energies that are here for us to use. Our God is a usable God or not, depending on how much you wake up to this concept. If God is all you are, and if you are everything, and if you are, in truth, trying to open to more love, you should be able to do this quite well. But if a lot of issues are clogging the channel for you, if the issues are clouding the love that you are, sometimes our manifestations and what we're trying to create comes in as a trickle, not a roar. Please listen to other radio shows on this. I'd appreciate it. Because now we've got to push on to magical thinking. Now I want to go back to where magical thinking starts. It starts in our childhood. We believe in Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny. By the way, happy Easter, everyone. Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, Cupid, any number of things we believe in, leprechauns. Children begin to practice magical thinking in their toddler years. It leads us to believe that certain actions we take can influence the world around us. For example, a kid needs their magic bat at Little League, or they won't play a good game. Closing the closet door in the bedroom at night will keep the monsters away. You see? We start this when we're very young. And society promotes it. I mean, we are told to believe in Santa Claus. We do certain things that help children feel safe. I know that one of my friends had a son that suffered terribly from separation anxiety. We gave him a little magical thinking about that. We found a real pretty little stone. And we gave it to, the mother gave it to him and said, darling, all my love is in this stone with you. Now you put this in your pocket and you carry it with you. And whenever you're missing me, you just touch this stone and you'll feel me so close with you and feel my love for you. And of course, it worked. Hi. Well, hello, Pat. I'm so glad you're listening. Heidi ho, and happy Easter to you too, darling. We're glad that all of you are with us. I hear from certain people. I know that others are listening. Thank you so much. And it means a lot to me. Okay. So, at this stage of development, before a child is 7 years old, as a matter of fact, they're thinking that magical thinking particularly is prominent anywhere. It is and develops anywhere from 2 to 7 and is very strong around that time. Thank you for the heart. Kids are egocentric and they believe that their actions directly influence the events around them. Then magical thinking gives an extra oomph to this. Studies have been done, by the way, on children and grieving. Now, I think that's really important because magical thinking often enters when something's difficult, stressful, uncomfortable, and that is one of the things we resort to, not only as children, but as adults. So if our parents are doing it and we see that happening on some level, then we ourselves will go down that path. Now, you keep in mind, as we're talking about this, that there's a good kind of magical thinking and an unhealthy kind of magical thinking. In the egoic child's mind, what I'm presenting to you is sometimes it's not the healthiest. And in the adult mind, it certainly is. And when you cross that threshold from the egoic child's mind to merging into the highest self, it changes, All of a sudden, for example, the magic thinking of keeping the monsters at bay and self-contamination by your evil thoughts and turning off the stove 25 times, which OCD is part of this, by the way. I should say magical thinking can be part of OCD. Those things are fear-based, right? So what happens when you cross the line and you find that fear changes to love and to creativity and to inspiration, where you write marvelous things, you paint marvelous pictures, you are of service to yourself and others. The energy changes into something higher, but it was based in your talents for magical thinking as a child. Okay, so back to children and grieving for a minute, because I think that that study, and the studies, I should say, that have been done on this. By the way, I want to say to everyone that I'm taking this talk not from a book, but from a lot of sources on the internet. So if you'd like to read more about magical thinking, you can hear the very things I'm talking about through various sources. I encourage you to get on there and look. Certainly, I'm adding my own spin. I always do. Guys, we do consciousness here. So we have to talk about things in a different way. And matter of fact, from my opinion, I think a lot of these scientists that are doing research on magical thinking have such a aversion to the magical thinking element. They're so afraid of some of this that they are not very open-minded about it. Now, that's only a generality, because some people are. So keep this in mind as you're doing your own research on this. I think it's fascinating, and I would hope that a lot of times I inspire you to do your own research and looking at certain things and reading certain books that I recommend. Okay. Children and grieving. It was discovered that children often feel that they are responsible for an event occurring, or are capable of reversing an event simply by thinking about it and wishing for change. I'm thinking about one particular man concerning this that I worked with a number of years ago, who was very dear. From the time he was born, his father was diagnosed with cancer. So, and by the way, ultimately died of it 15 years later or 16 years later. And this young man was always told never to be a child, never to raise his voice, never to fight with his sister, never to do anything like this, or it could kill your father. Well, that's certainly blatant. Would that be true? No, it wouldn't. I'm sorry, it wouldn't. It might cause a little stress in the household. But the child was never allowed to be a child. And so when the father did indeed die, even though he had a rational mind that said you are not responsible, this young man did feel responsible. You see? You see how this works? Make-believe and fantasy to the toddler are an integral part of life at this stage of your development. And they're used to explain the unexplainable. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, a little kid's mind can't get their mind around, say, death. Not their own, and not other people's, and not their pets. The larger picture mind, the advanced mind, the highest self that I'm talking about, the part of you that sees things in a more global perspective, doesn't even start developing until you're in your 20s, science tells us. That's the developed mind. So what the child is the undeveloped mind. The mind that only sees itself relative to what's going on in the world. It sees itself. It's responsible for everything. Is it true? No. Only in the child's mind. You understand? Okay. Children at this age believe what they feel and experience is the same as everyone else's feelings and experiences. Hence, they'll project their feelings on. For example, this young man that I was just mentioning, who thinks he was responsible for the death of his father, thinks everybody else thinks he's responsible for the death of his father. They lack the ability to understand other explanations for things outside their realm of things that have already been understood, you see? That's what I'm saying. The child's mind can only see itself. It can't see the larger picture. They don't understand abstract concepts, as I said, like death. A child might feel, if I was just a better child, if I just hadn't yelled so much, my mother might love me. My father wouldn't have died. I could have done something, and I didn't do it to prevent this from happening. A child might actually feel responsible for what has happened simply because they were upset with the person who died, or they took their deaths too lightly and laughed because they didn't understand because they were 6, right? Or they played with their pet too roughly, they say to themselves. So that's why the animal was poisoned in the neighborhood. There may be the idea that if the child wishes hard enough or performs just the right act of perhaps contrition, the person or pet may choose to come back and not be dead anymore. These ways of thinking, if not balanced with rational thought later on and not put in perspective, create difficulty in one's adult life. Now, we'll talk about that in just a minute, all right? Right now, I'd like to go into some common characteristics, really, of magical thinking. Now, you keep in mind, you got the good magical thinking, and you got the magical thinking that sabotages us. I want you not to forget that you are of two minds. And it is your motivation for using these minds that enhance your life or pull it down. Okay? So the characteristics of magical thinking are, number 1, anything can be sacred. It depends on what you're assigning it. Giving you a couple of examples. I mean, this can be, by the way, magical thinking can be really quite the cultural phenomenon as well as something quite personal. I'll give you an example of both. So, cultural phenomenon. There's something, and I can't remember which museum it is in, but it is in Vienna, Austria. And I saw it. It was really interesting. There's something called the Sword of Destiny. The Sword of Destiny. The Sword of Destiny is supposed to be the sword tip, the bayonet tip, if you will, that was on the edge of a pike that they say pierced Christ's side. Who is they? I don't know. Millennium, right? People through the years. It's considered a religious artifact. They say they talk about a story that Hitler used to go to the museum and he used to stand in front of it for hours. The Sword of Destiny. All right. Is it the sword that pierced Christ's side? I don't know. I don't know. There may be 50 swords of destiny, like there are 50 birthplaces of Christ. I don't know. I don't know. But enough people believe it does. They're imbuing energetically something onto that because they believe, right? They're giving it some sort of power. Here's a personal example. So years ago, I was selling my mother's and father's house. It was time to move on. It really was, for many reasons. This was, though, my mother's dream house. And I had not really seen what was in it. My father was a sucker for anything that came down the pike in terms of a salesman. So he had bought all this real junk. It was stored in the basement. I had to clean all that out, right? So I gave, 7 or 8 yard sales. So there you go. I give 7 or 8 yard sales, getting rid of all this stuff. At one point, now, a lot of stress on me, right? Emotional stress. This was my mother's dream house. At one point, I was selling a lot of kitchen stuff in yard sales. You know, everybody likes old kitchen stuff. Well, at one point, I just kind of freaked out. I was looking for a spatula. Not just any old spatula. By the way, this spatula would not be worth 2 cents. It was something from, 1950, right? My childhood. But it was the spatula that I would lick the icing off of in the kitchen when my mother iced a cake. I freaked out because I couldn't find it. Didn't want to sell that. Well, the end of the story is I found it. And it made me look at this crazy reaction I had. Now, why did I have that to this spatula that had no monetary value at all? Well, you know already, right? It was because of what I emotionally assigned to that spatula. It was the good feelings that I had of my mother loving me by baking a cake and icing it and letting me be special enough to lick that off. It was an element of the love my mother had for me and the communion we shared in that moment, you see? So what we do sometimes is we take objects, people, things, and we will apply a metaphor to them. There will be something more than what they really are. And that's really important for you to know, because a lot of times we've got to figure out what that is, because that's why we're hurting so badly. I had to figure out, it took just a few minutes of thought, why am I so upset about this? Oh, there it is. And then there was the spatula. Come on, guys. But we do this. We can, and anything can be sacred. And by the way, anyone. If you're upset, what's the metaphor? What emotion have you assigned to that person or thing? Another characteristic of magical thinking is that anything can be cursed in a magical thinking mind. There's such a thing as, and I quote, moral contagion. It's what it's called in psychology. Moral contagion. Let me give you an example of that. Moral contagion says a drop of sewage does more to a bucket of clean water than a drop of clean water does to a bucket of sewage. That's the concept. You understand what I just said? A drop of sewage does more to a bucket of clean water than a drop of clean water does to a bucket of sewage. That's the concept. Okay. Traditional cleaning in people's minds can't even erase bad, as we say, vibes. That's what they said on the internet. If people believe in these bad vibes. For example, studies show that people have a strong aversion to wearing laundered clothes that have been worn by a murderer or someone who's lost a limb in an accident or had a real string of bad luck. Huh? Magical thinking. Another characteristic is what they call mind rules over matter. Wishing is probably the most ubiquitous kind of magical spell around. The unreasonable expectation that your thoughts have force and energy to act on the world. Well, that's a real interesting concept to all of us that deal with consciousness, right? Because I want to tell you, in my belief system, they do, but only in a certain way. You see, when you are working from your egoic child's mind and trying to create anything, you are not clear. And you have a belief system that you don't even know about, that is your old program running underneath everything you say, you do, and you feel in life. So you may be saying, I want a great new employee for my business. And underneath, you are the child defeated by her family who never gets anything. This may be conscious, this may be unconscious, these programs that are underneath. But if you don't think they're going to influence your ability to create what you want consciously, you really are wrong about that. This is my business. I've been dealing with this a long time. What I do is go in and find out how you really feel about things. If you don't have a partner yet and you say you want one, I guarantee you there's a program underneath saying you don't. Let's find out what that is. That's what we have to do. That's what consciousness work is. You got to clear out what's in the way of incredible love and balance and joy, creativity, and peace. Okay. The closed-minded person who thinks that this does not work and that it's so much hooey and magical thinking, I don't think, in my opinion, has gone far enough. We need to open the mind. However, if you have these false beliefs that in your ego, child's mind, you can influence anything the way you want it to go, well, that's pretty much pure fantasy. You are creating the whole time, by the way. You're just creating what you don't want. If you've got this program going on underneath saying, I'm never going to get what I want, then by God, you're not going to get what you want. So we have to address those things. We have to change the energy of those things by resolving them, and then it's not there anymore, and you don't run from that program anymore. You remember the only two programs there are, and every single thing falls under these two programs is, you don't care about me, and I don't get what I want. Those are the programs that are under every single person in the world. They need to be addressed if you're going to create things well. So, I happen to believe that there is mind over matter, but only in the clearest and most conscious states does it work beautifully. I've noticed for years that churches and certain religions that espouse change your mind and change your life have the highest attrition rates. Because people say, oh, this is great. Yes, change your mind, change your life. And there's an element of truth that we all respond to about that. But when it doesn't work, what's our default? Thank you. We think it doesn't work. We're defeated. It's futile. Takes too much energy. Doesn't work for us, works for everybody else. Okay. And we'll go into those old beliefs. You have to address the blocks in the ego child's mind first before you can manifest well. And this is a reality-based system, guys. This is not a fantasy-based system. All the magical thinking of how wonderful it's going to be is not going to help you with this. It just makes you feel good and helps you endure. But do you want to endure or do you want to create something? It has to do with consciousness and what mind you're actually using. Number 4. Another thing about magical thinking is that rituals bring good luck. To engage in a mindless repetition of actions with no proven causal effect is sometimes what we're talking about by ritual, always what we're talking about ritual, when it comes from the egoic child's mind. When you engage in mindless repetition of actions with no proven causal effect. The elaborate dances that players do during baseball games are a good example of this. Now, I don't follow baseball, but this was mentioned, so I'm going to mention this in case you do. They mentioned a player called Mike Hargrove, and they said that his ritual acts they nicknamed him the human rain delay. I like that a lot, because of his obsessive shenanigans while at bat. We use ritual acts most often when there is, important to know, little cost to them, when an outcome is uncertain and beyond our control, and when the stakes are high. People who truly trust their rituals exhibit a phenomenon known as the illusion of control, the belief that they have more influence over the world than they actually do. And it's not a bad delusion to have, honestly. In some cases, when it comes from the highest self, a sense of control encourages people to work harder than they might do otherwise. In fact, a fully accurate assessment of your powers, a state known as, here it is, depressive realism, haunts people with clinical depression when they show very little usability of magical realism. You know, I'm trying to think of any rituals that I have that bring good luck. I know they're there. At one point, I probably did believe in all that, you know, the magic stone, the magic this, the magic that. I don't tend to believe in that anymore. The reason I say that is I think all of that is inside me. I'm just a person, but I am the aspect of God known as me, as you are, as everybody is, as everything is. And in that, whatever power I have is that. You see? So I tend not to believe in magic wands. I don't tend to believe in things external to me. However, I do want to say that while I don't believe necessarily that rituals bring me good luck, there are rituals that I do, that I even do unconsciously, like getting up in the morning. What do I do first? Do I brush my teeth? Do I wash my face? Do I put on my shoes? Do I put on my jaw? What do I do? First, second, third, fourth. There's a little ritual, always, to what we do. Does it harm anyone? No. Does it keep us safe and make us feel safe? Yes, on some level. But do we need it to feel safe? Now, that reveals whether it's healthy or unhealthy. Understand? All right. Number 5. Another characteristic. To name is to rule, just as thoughts and objects have power that we assign it. So do names. Language has the ability to dredge up associations. You know, spatula, when I reach for it still, let me tell you, that program, that lovely little moment with my mom is always there. Do I reach for it all the time? Absolutely not. It's in the drawer. I very rarely use it, but it's there, okay? And if I do reach for it, it's a nice feeling. There is something called nominal realism, concerning this, about naming things. After watching, this was an interesting study. So they took a group of people, and this group of people watched sugar being poured into 2 glasses of water. They affixed a sign to one of them saying sucrose, and they fixed a sign to the other one saying poison. These were just labels. And people much preferred to drink from the one that said sucrose than the one that said poison. What was really interesting is they did a 3rd glass, as I understand it, and it was labeled not poison. And people still preferred the one that said sucrose because the subconscious, and you should know this, does not process negatives. The subconscious mind does not process negatives. Be careful what you say. It doesn't process negatives. If you say, I do not want a partner that does this when you're trying to manifest something, you get it. All right. Now, I think it's really funny because certainly when we're talking about this, I think a certain amount of this is true. You know, I look at, what were those water books? The Japanese scientist, or Japanese, I don't think he was even a scientist, but he took pictures of the molecules of water from a certain well, and he influenced these things by writing on notes what these certain words like cancer, and the molecules turned out to be, the crystals turned out to be distorted, and then he'd write love on something, and they were beautiful, whole crystals. I happen to think that that kind of thing is probably true. I'm wondering, in an experiment like this, if other people feel that. We might be reluctant to tear up a piece of paper with a loved one's name written on it, or throw away an old love note. Arbitrary symbols carry the essence of what they represent, many of us feel. In a similar vein, I think it's interesting that the name Adolf, by the way, dropped off very sharply in the 1940s. Now, again, the only reason I'm bringing this up is this is neither good nor bad. It's really what mind this idea is generated from, and whether it's fear-based or love-based, whether it enhances your life or doesn't do anything at all or pulls it down. Number 6 is belief in a just world. Now, you've heard me talk about this as an issue, belief in a just world. Belief in a just world somehow puts our minds at ease, even if things are beyond our control. They happen for a reason, we tell ourselves, right? I have a call, so hang on just a moment and I will be with you. I just saw it. It's a 951 exchange. I'll come to you in just a moment, all right? So belief in a just world puts our minds at ease, even if things are beyond our control. They happen for a reason, we tell ourselves, right? Just people who believe in a just world tend to be more religious, sometimes more spiritual. Faith in cosmic jurisprudence starts early. Harvard psychologists have found that kids between the ages of 5 and 7 who find $5 on the sidewalk are more popular than kids whose soccer game got rained out. Isn't that interesting? Now, I think a lot of other things can be in that, too. I'm sorry, you know, I find some of these tests interesting, but how much narcissism is in there now? How much do you want to be aligned with someone who is richer? Okay? How much do you want to, and how much greed is in there? How much do you think they're going to share with you? But belief in a just world and trying to make it just, I do want to say, is more or less an issue, because it causes you to try to control things sometimes. Either that, or it can prevent you from fighting for more justice. The blame the victim effect is here and present in this. If a test subject is submitted, for example, this was another test, to painful shocks that he can't escape, people who are watching this or who have been told about that actually think less of him, because it satisfies our mind. It's comforting to assume that he must deserve it somehow. There is a confirmation bias in there somewhere, you see. Jinxes in the form of tempting fate are closely related to what we're talking about here, assuming that an omniscient, for some reason I can't talk today, an omniscient being can read our minds and strike us down for our immorality, keeps us from misbehaving and being ousted from our groups. We still think, some people still think, that the universe is keeping moral tabs on us. And we think if we outsmart it or cheat it in some way, that it will subdue us, humble us, punish us with a heavy dose of reality at some point. We'll be slapped down. And the ritual of knocking on wood, I think, is there to satisfy us or please us, that if we do it, then the universe might spare us. You know, I don't think in terms of just or unjust in this life. This starts in our kidhood. So what's on the other side of this? Belief in a just world, not a belief in an unjust world. That's not on the other side of it, although that's what people swing between in terms of their belief system. I actually think it's just about this moment and creating the life you want. Then you don't have to believe in what's just and what's not just, and whether you have gotten your share or not. All right, another characteristic of, I was going to go to this caller, so let's do that first. And let's see if I can bring you in. Hello, this is Martha Novak. I'm talking to a 951 exchange. To whom am I speaking? Hello? Let's see, do I have... Hello? Is anyone there? Well, I'm so sorry that I cannot bring you in today. I don't know what is happening, but for some reason I cannot. So I'm going to keep the line open, and certainly let me know if you have something to say. All right, number 7 is a belief that the world is alive. To believe that the universe is sympathetic to our wishes is to believe that it has a mind or a soul, however rudimentary. This is considered by some magical thinking. We often see inanimate objects as infused with a life force. You know, I think the nice thing is that we all know on some level that all matter has potential, right? The problem comes with us thinking that the potential is the same for us all. You've heard me say that, everything is alive in some sense because everything is moving. Molecules are moving. You can think of that as alive or not. But it's not the same as your consciousness, the stone in the yard being the best stone it can be, being the molecules. It's not thinking the way you do. So I think it's nice when we think that everything is infused with potential, but the potential isn't the same. Magical thinking comes when we do assume somehow it's the same. Now, one of the psychologists that wrote all this gave you some examples. Old furniture knows things about the past. Well, does it really know things about the past the way you think it knows things about the past? I don't think so. I think it might contain the energy of the past. Might not. It depends on your belief system. Won't hurt anybody one way or another. Another is an evil thought, is contaminated. Well, I happen to know someone who used to think that whose life was shut down when they thought an evil thought, because they had to stop and do a million anti-contamination rituals and pray and pray and pray because they thought they were contaminated. There's no such thing. I don't believe in that. I think that's a great example of the fear-based child's mind, trying to make it feel safe. This psychologist or writer, whatever he was mentioning feng shui and astrology and all that. Who's to say that those things aren't true? Certainly, I don't think of astrology as any kind of pronouncement on your life. I think it's fun to read horoscopes as well, to see what might be a trend or something. I, again, go back to, pardon me, we create our own lives in this moment. It isn't about influences of something else taking over. There's nothing that can take us over except our own fear or our own love. Which do you want to believe in? Who's to say what's true and what's not true when it opens the door to deeper consciousness? And who's to say that when you open those doors to deeper consciousness that people are not going to see what other people miss? So I think we need to be emotionally very honest with ourselves. We need to see what mind we are working from, and we need to be very clear about this. Number 8, another characteristic is actually technology, if you want to know the truth, what technology is showing us. Arthur C. Clarke, who, my apologies, I didn't look him up to see who he is, but he wrote, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Cyberspace, avatars, instant messaging, all of this. Well, it seems magic to me. Computer viruses act even more like curses than real germs do," this writer said. "Simple clicks of the buttons or links on your computer can have surprising and far-reaching effects. Action at a distance certainly is demonstrated by emails. Computer hacks equal coding magic." Technosis author Eric Davis said, and I thought this was very interesting, "So it will make sense to have a degree of magical thinking just to be able to deal with these devices." I want to say to you now, in terms of what we're doing here, the key to magical thinking from a consciousness perspective is what mind you are generating it from. Are you generating it from the egoic child's mind or the highest mind? What is motivating you? And to answer what is motivating you, that question, you must have, number one, an awareness a deeper awareness, a deeper and ever-growing deeper awareness of yourself, of your energy. And that's one of the things that consciousness studies does for you. Number 2, it requires an emotional honesty and a keen awareness and honesty of which mind you are using and to what end. And number 3, it requires an emotional clarity that comes, a clarity mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually that comes actually from deeper consciousness. So in other words, I think the answer here is to explore your consciousness. Now let's talk about when magical thinking becomes a problem for you. It becomes a problem when you cease to function normally in the world. Fantasy, a kind of magical thinking, by the way, is its own reward. You've heard me talk about that over and over again. Fantasy is its own reward. Look, you're here to live in the world. You're here as a physical being. You're a spiritual being in physical form. That's what consciousness opens for you. But you're here to live and to connect and to associate and to be a participant in life. Such and ADHD, here we are, back, yay! When you combine magical thinking with defenses like OCD and ADD or ADHD, sometimes we have a real problem. OCD is a condition that causes individuals to suffer from intrusive and unwanted thoughts that cause distress and result in feelings that they need to perform some sort of compulsion being a repeated behavior to minimize the anxiety that is caused by the obsession. You understand? Magical thinking in OCD makes the individual feel like they have an expanded sense of responsibility to themselves and to others, by the way. It's an overdeveloped sense of responsibility to themselves and the others to keep them safe, to cause safety or prevent harm in some way. It allows the person that uses this to feel safer and in more control, regardless of how irrational their thoughts and behaviors are perceived, even by themselves or others. It comes from the fear-based self, ladies and gentlemen, that fearful part of us, preoccupied with ensuring the safety of self and others. I'm going to read you some common obsessions of magical thinking of OCD. Fears that if a person doesn't do certain things in a certain way, something bad will happen to themselves or to a loved one, by the way. Superstitious thoughts and an extreme fear of superstitions. A preoccupation with connecting dots from situations in the past to current situations or obsessions. I think of a woman that I know that had a very hard time with this. She had OCD at the time she came to me, and she could not understand how material that I was teaching got deeper and seemed to shift and change as one made one's way through growth and change. She wanted an absolute to be an absolute because it made her feel safer, you see. It's not an absolute. Nothing's an absolute. As you deepen new information sometimes. Another common obsession of magical thinking is obsessive thinking around certain numbers, colors, words, or actions. I know a lot of people count that are children, and it sometimes follows them into adulthood, right? Common compulsions of magical thinking OCD, and as I said, you can find this on the internet. Among compulsions associated with magical thinking within OCD are these: repeating certain words, names, sounds, or numbers. Now you keep in mind, this is a fear-based experience. If it's not fear-based, it doesn't qualify. I think of something like there is a sign posted near one of my houses, near my house, and the sign announces a gift or a hospital or a donation from certain individuals. The name is Wilbur and Hilda Glenn. That's the name. With all due respect to them, I don't know who they are, but they gave great gifts to help children, and I think that's marvelous. But listen to these names: Wilbur and Hilda Glenn. Wilbur and Hilda Glenn. For those of you that might love words like I do, and sounds of words and sounds they make in the mouth, I just love rolling those two names around in my mouth. I don't do it because it's anxiety driven. I do it for pleasure. This is what I'm talking about. What's your motivation? You see? All right. Another common compulsion: to trace back steps to undo any potential harm that could be caused to others, to literally sometimes retrace steps, to go back and not step on a crack, bypass that crack, to walk in a certain way to avoid cracks on the sidewalk or floor, to follow a certain ritualistic pattern repeatedly until anxiety diminishes. Another one: performing certain compulsive behaviors at a particular time of day, a nighttime routine. Not routine, ritual. A bedtime ritual. Yeah, I see nothing wrong with routines and rituals as long as they aren't anxiety-based. But you need to call yourself on these if they are, and we need to help you. You need to get beyond these things. We need to go back and find out what you're anxious about, why that program has to run underneath that, and resolve it in some way. We resolve it through energy work. Somebody else might resolve it through talk therapy. We do both, by the way. And somebody else might resolve it through the assorted therapies that are out there. But not having it addressed is not fully living your life in the way that I think you might want to live your life. And that's why you're listening to a show like this anyway, in my opinion. Another obsession, another compulsion might be placing or arranging certain items in a distinct order, or making physical contact with certain items in order to avert harm or create good luck, like knocking on wood in an exact pattern or a certain number of times or something, you see? I think of one dear friend of mine who is actually just someone I am so intensely proud of. Years ago, she's a painter, and a very good one. Years ago, I took her out into the garden because I wanted to work on her OCD. And I got all my paints out, all my brushes out. I have a considerable number. And I gave her a piece of paper or canvas or something, and I said, now I want you to take 20 minutes and I want you to draw the worst picture you possibly could, because she's, huge perfectionist, was at that time. And And 20 minutes later, I went back and she's still arranging her brushes. I said, that's not going to do. You have 20 minutes to draw something. You pick up a brush and you draw it right now, and you draw the worst picture you can possibly think of. She just completely freaked out about that. The interesting thing about this was at the end of 20 minutes, she had quite the good painting. All right. So that is just a little general thing about OCD. Let's talk about ADD for a minute and ADHD, because these can have elements of magical thinking connected to them too. Adult ADHD magical thinking can sound like this. I'll do it later, tomorrow, or on vacation, or sometime in the future. Number 2, it won't take much time. I know someone like this who means extremely well, but they overcommit because they have no sense of the time it will take. You see? It's all good. I know someone else like this. It's all good. Is it? Where's the evidence that it's all good? Now here's the irony, and here's that marvelous gyre that we're talking about that has been the spiritual symbol for years. Is it all good? Everybody that goes on the conscious path will say, yes, indeed, it is all good. But it's real. We really believe that. It's all good, even if something hurts like hell, even if it is a tremendous loss that sometimes life gives us, we say, it is all good, and it is authentic, and it is realistic. But the people that are in the more shallow end of the pool, they don't have that deep knowledge that it's all good. They just say it's all good because they need to believe that. And they get, and I had an example of this week, that somebody just was devastated towards something they shouldn't be devastated with, it just a disappointment in life. And I said, well, the disappointment in life shows you that you're just slapping a fantasy on top of things and saying it's all good. And you don't really believe that. There's a huge element of futility and defeatism underneath that. Now let's get that, because there it is. Or you'd be able to say, well, obviously this is not the end because it wasn't what I wanted, so let's keep going, right? Another thing you might say, I'm 5 minutes away when you are really not. Another thing you might say, I'll remember, I don't need to write it down. Oh, really? Let me tell you, you need to write everything down when we're hitting something that you don't want to remember. Something else that ADHD might think, magical thinking. This will be easy. All right, enough said about that one. It will never happen again. Magical thinking, ADHD or ADD. I have a to-do list. It's 5 pages long, of course, and you can't possibly prioritize that. Okay. These things might be created with the best of intentions. Nevertheless, you're not stopping and connecting with your deepest thing. ADD and ADHD are anxiety-based. It's an anxiety-based behavior to run on to the next thing. You see, there isn't any mindfulness in this, and the problem with that is that it's right here and right now that you create what you are going to do, what you're thinking and feeling, and what you want. There's a delusional optimism. I think that's a wonderful expression. I think that my friend who thinks, it's all good, is in delusional optimism. Delusional optimism, I think, can take many forms. Belief that belief in whatever, this Pollyanna attitude that is not founded in reality, instead of really knowing that it's all good and it's all going to work out. You understand? I think there is a lot of shame and guilt when we think we don't have control over our lives. Sometimes, particularly when we do spiritual work, we think we ought to be a different way, but that's not accepting that we are everything, including the shame and guilt. It is not in, the answers here are not in trying to avoid that in consciousness, but to embrace that as part of us and then do something else. Realizing, well, if we are all of God and God is everything, then that is us. But do you want to invest your energy in that anymore? And the answer will be no. Probably not. And you'll go on to do something else. Now, concerning all this magical thinking, I need for you to realize, is it fear-based or love-based? What's going on here? This is what you're going to have to answer to. And you must recognize your magical phrases that you use most often. You're going to have to listen to yourself. Then you're going to have to do a quick reality check. What are the facts? Why are you using this? What has happened before in the past that creates this? And is this a life-enhancing thought or is it not? Is this an anxiety-driven thought or is it not? I think that's really important to ask yourself. That's how. Oh, hello, darling. Well, Michelle, happy Sunday to you from the United States. We just had Michelle that came from Canada to see us. We're so glad. Now, what are some other forms of magical thinking? Some that don't hurt us, that we should be enjoying. I'll tell you one of them. It's the suspension of disbelief. One of the reasons that you enjoy television and you enjoy some of the movies that you watch is that you're not sitting there going, that can't happen, that can't happen, that can't happen, that can't happen. You see, it's the depressive realism, if you're into that. That can't happen. Unfortunately, in our lives, we're saying that can't happen way too often. I do want to mention to you that we have a talent for the suspension of disbelief. Most people do. That's not bad. As a matter of fact, I'll show you how to make it work. You know, I mentioned there was a woman that was keenly disappointed this week because she had some of this that I was saying that she slaps on, it's all good. And when it's, you know, she doesn't believe that at all. And what I want to say about that is you have also a talent for compartmentalizing. Now, compartmentalizing sometimes is not a good thing. You can hear this in other radio shows when you don't ultimately accept all of you. That's going to stop your consciousness work because it's all about accepting everything and seeing who you are now and making choices about what you are going to be in this moment and in the future that defines your consciousness, right? So in this particular case, she was disappointed because someone that she was hoping would come into her business, and she owns a business, did not work out. Oh, she was so disappointed. Keenly disappointed, too disappointed, because she had it in her mind, it arranged just so. Just so. She wanted it a certain way. And I pointed this out, and she said, but I need this employee right away. So what am I going to do? And I said, you're going to use your suspension of disbelief. You're going to say in your prayers, in your manifestation, God, I do have this defeatism. I do have this idea that I'm not going to get what I want here, and that nobody's going to care that I don't get what I want. I have that. I put my arms around it now, and I say I'm dealing with that, and I'm changing and growing and trying to move past that, and one day I will. Right now I have it, so I'm going to put it over here while I say, right now, I need this employee, and send this employee in and suspend my disbelief about anything that could sabotage this, because I need to hire this person right now. That's how to use your suspension of disbelief well, to manifest how you want to manifest. Now, manifestation. Here we are. There are going to be some people that say manifestation itself is an illusion. It is magical thinking at its finest. I say that's not true. I say it is illusion at its finest. If you are not cleared out, because the ego child's mind doesn't do it well. Oh, they do it well. Wait a minute. That's a misnomer. They do it well. That's misleading, I meant to say. Because they're creating what they don't want. But to create what you do want, you better be clear. Better have more of your issues out of the way. You see? Better have the clear mind and heart and the emotional integrity that you need, that we talked about earlier. 9 minutes to go. Another form of magical thinking that can work for us or not work for us is superstition. Couples who rent a boat in the pond in Japan, I think it's called Inokashira Park. There's a superstition that couples that rent a boat there will always break up. There's an archway in Athens, Georgia, that leads to the campus. I was told to watch standing under that arch years ago, because everybody who stood under there got pregnant. Superstitions may be valued as fun elements of a culture, and sometimes superstitions are taken quite seriously. Now, what I want to say about them is, does anxiety drive them or not? Okay. Illusion of control is another element I want to talk about. The illusion of control. We all need to have control of our lives. You've heard me say in other radio shows, we should all have the ability to choose the life that we want to live, and we should choose the right to die the way we want to. How we live and die is our business. I just lost a friend last March 2nd. She needed to have control of how she wanted to do things. Did many of her friends approve of this? Well, it wasn't our choice to approve or disapprove, although we did in the beginning. We moved through that. I mean, we realized this was clearly her choice, and she needed her choice. Everybody has the right to that. That is the conclusion we came through. So we stood by her and loved her and let her do what she needed to do. So I believe in that. However, what I want to challenge is, if you're cleaning the house to control emotional chaos on the inside of you, if you are using prayer rituals to control evil thoughts and contaminations that you think are going to come and get you, I think you ought to look at that. Because those are illusions of control that are fear-based, and they are going to slow you down and even hurt you. Those are the things that will hurt you, not what you think it will be. And the ego child's mind that creates that must be challenged. We talked about technology. We don't understand how it works, but expect wonderful and or terrible things from it. I always look at this, even what we're talking about right now. Here I am talking on Facebook Live. And I started the show saying, I hope the technology holds on Blog Talk Radio, on Facebook Live. Sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. I want to say to you that I try not to stress about that. I'm hoping that if we have a show, you'll get something from it. And so will I, by the way. I'm hoping that if we don't have a show, that you will make use of your time beautifully. You possibly can look at our archive shows. But is it going to ruin my life? No. And I hope it does not ruin yours. It shouldn't. It just shouldn't. Life is to be enjoyed. There's something called a regression fallacy. Regression toward the mean. People often mistake their actions as being responsible for unusual events that scientists say happen by chance. I'm not sure I believe in chance. I do believe that there is energy going on underneath us all. And I think this regression fallacy is, I'm not sure I believe in it the way it is talked about in science. I think there are energetic reasons that things happen. I do think it becomes a problem when we are inflating ourselves, our talents, and our abilities out of an issue. When we need to be good, when we need to be more conscious than we are. See, the need is the problem. Because opening consciousness, for example, if we're just talking about that, is an organic process. We should not go back and mistake anything for anything. I don't think that things happen by chance. That's just my belief system. I think things happen by energy. We only have 3 minutes left to go. I'm wondering as I sit here how much to go into, but let me say this. I lost my dear husband for 35 years. We were friends when we were 20. And he married someone else, and so did I, and we had about 35 years where we lost each other. He didn't even know my married name, and out of the blue, he found me. His dear wife, his first wife, who passed, had written my parents' address in her phone book over and over and over again through all those years. So Michael got on the internet now, the magical internet. And he saw who sold that house. And it was me and my married name, my parents' house. And he found me on LinkedIn. That seems like a miracle, doesn't it? And it was. But we've talked about since how we kept the energy alive. Our mutual friend who passed away, that Michael was Michael's girlfriend, gave me a little nail file, a gift. She said, you'll never need another nail file but this one. And she was right. It was a Diamond Deb. I don't even think they make them anymore. And every time I used that nail file, I thought of her, and I thought of Michael. He thought of me every time his car turned over, and there were a lot of zeros in his odometer, because that had happened.
90 seconds.
That happened when I was with him. In other words, that and several other things kept the energy alive between us and resulted in him finding me. I do believe there's energy under everything, and it is the energy that makes things work. I hope you've enjoyed this show. Guys, I'm going to do some praying afterwards, but please follow us. Please share the show if you're interested. If you've enjoyed it, please
60
listen.
seconds.
listen to our archive shows. Enjoy everything, please. We do hope you will, and that you are having a wonderful day today. And you remember that God loves you through you. And there is a deep and abiding, wonderful life for you that is beyond even what you think now. All right, guys, be brave, be true, be courageous, go on, and do your job on yourself, okay? Life is good. Promise. Take care now. See you next week. Bye-bye.